Carol Vorderman has got a new book out called Now What? And she's doing a round of interviews, and she did a really good interview on the Joe channel the other day. And her comments regarding the continued deference to disgraced or failed Westminster politicians, particularly she mentions Liz Truss, and with good reason, strikes a chord. Because there's a disconnect between public accountability on the one hand and the reverence for failed figures that still receive sort of obeisance and are still why Hamlet asks, why should the poor be flattered? Why should these Westminster failures be flattered? Liz Truss, whose premiership was marked by a disastrous mini-budget that led to significant economic instability and rising mortgages, is a prime example. Despite her short-lived tenure as Prime Minister and widely recognised policy missteps, as detailed apparently very, very shortly in the coming book by Graham Brady. She thought she could cling on. He thought that was ridiculous. Despite these missteps, she has been afforded platforms to continue influencing policy discussions. When she was sitting on that stage and the lettuce appeared behind her, she took offence. Why should she take offence? Why was nobody asking her these questions? What sort of lettuce do you buy in the shops, Miss Truss? I mean, her presence at events like international economic forums or as a commentator on issues she herself mishandled feels inappropriate to critics as she and they sidestep accountability. That is the job of journalists. That is the job of satirists, to poke fun at people who need that bubble bursting. And Carol Vorderman says it's the Westminster bubble. This deference to Truss can be seen in the way that she is often given the benefit of the doubt by political pundits and even some sections of the media. They seem to have got used to bowing and scraping. Instead of being scrutinised more harshly, there remains a reluctance to challenge her standing within the Conservative Party ranks. I think there was a W missing. For example, despite her role in the economic turmoil, she still appears on platforms advocating for economic and tax policies, almost as if her tenure hadn't unravelled in a fiscal crisis. Similar patterns of deference have emerged over other former disgraced politicians. Tony Blair, while less of a failed politician in the traditional sense, remains a contentious figure, doesn't he, for his role in the Iraq War. And despite the widespread disillusion over the war and the accusations of misleading Parliament, Blair is still regularly invited to speak on global governance and policy, with some circles even treating him as a respected elder statesman. The reverence shown to Blair often overlooks the deep political and public mistrust tied to his decision-making during the war. Another notable example is Boris Johnson. His resignation, prompted by multiple scandals, including Partygate to misleading Parliament over COVID-19 breaches, might have been expected to end his political career in disgrace. Yet deference continues, with some sections of the Conservative Party and media treating him as a potential comeback candidate. It is madness, and inviting him to global conferences or to go and see Zelensky. Even his post-political career as a columnist in the Daily Mail raises eyebrows as it symbolises the strange juxtaposition of a scandal with continued public influence. The same true of Nadine Dorries, except that people recognise that she is fairly insubstantial. Matt Hancock. Somebody was telling me the other day about a story with Jeremy Hunt and meeting him in a supermarket. Well, not meeting him in a supermarket. And he went past and he made some comment. And Jeremy Hunt called after him and said, "It's democracy." And he replied back, "No, it's ignorance." What he should have said was, if you think it's democracy, come and talk publicly on social media about it. But Jeremy Hunt won't. He just wants the one line last word because he's powerful. Jeremy Hunt is almost single-handedly responsible for the failure of the NHS. I mean, it took Matt Hancock to turn the screw, but Jeremy Hunt more so even than Baroness Moan, is responsible for this catastrophe, because he stripped it down to the bare essentials so that it could not function. And the BBC has come under scrutiny for inconsistencies in how it handles figures involved in controversy, the treatment of Hugh Edwards, for example, after allegations of inappropriate behaviour surfaced. It raises questions about the broadcaster's standards. How could he possibly remain on a salary, and in fact an increasing salary, given the stories? Edwards was initially shielded from much of the immediate fallout, while others like Carol Vorderman, as she says, have faced harsher scrutiny or sidelined for comparatively minor controversies or simply being outspoken. The disparity in treatment creates the perception of a disconnect between those who are publicly disgraced and those who face actual professional consequences. And as for speaking out of turn when you're not on the telly, entirely acceptable. People have a life. People are not the icon of the BBC, and the BBC needs to get away from that completely absurd idea. The BBC is one thing, and the people who appear on it are another, and the BBC gets into trouble by thinking that the people who appear in it are some sort of deities or saints. They're not. They're ordinary people who are hired and paid by the BBC. The BBC doesn't pay them for every moment of their life. The BBC pays them while they're on the channel. That's it. It's a job. And the broader trend in British public life is how political elites and public figures are shielded from the kinds of accountability that might be expected from ordinary individuals. And these examples show how even when politicians leave office under a cloud, they often retain access to significant platforms where they are treated with a level of respect that seems incongruent with their failures. For many, including Vorderman, this speaks of a failure of the political and media establishments to hold truly powerful figures to account, allowing them to retain influence in a way that undermines public confidence in leadership. We have moved on from the 1960s, and this forelock-tugging Westminster bubble needs to be broken. Carol Vorderman is quite right.